Thank you, Teresa. My name is Allison Brady, and I'm delighted today to have a special guest and speaker. We are this year celebrating 3 50-year events. Other than the first man on the moon, do you know what the other 2 are? I can only remember one of them right now. Woodstock. So if you're wearing tie-dye this year, very appropriate, bring out those bell bottoms. And there's one more, what is it? It'll come to me. I'll get back to you on that. So this is the 50th anniversary of the first man on the moon, Neil Armstrong. And we thought that we should bring awareness to the event. So at your table you have some flyers I'll talk about later. But we did want to bring in a special speaker. I got to hear Gary speak at this spring in New Knoxville with a historical society. And maybe you know Gary Katterheinrich as an employee at Goodyear for 9 years. Or maybe you know Gary as the creator and the chief engineer of the Friendship Train. Do you remember that? At the fair you would see that in many different events. Perhaps you know him as the husband to a very patient Sylvia, which we have with us today. Thank you for joining us. Perhaps you know Gary as an airline pilot with at least one heroic landing story I'm told about. Not sure what that was. But Gary Katterheinrich was the 30-year manager at the Auglaize County Airport. And in that time, he had a relationship with Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. And so would you please join me in welcoming Gary Katterheinrich with his mostly true tales of Neil Armstrong.
Well, good afternoon. It's 1 minute after 12. Can you hear me all right? That's better, probably. Yeah. A lot of you people out there know me, and that's not good. But Allison called me I don't know how many times, and boy, is she a negotiator. We talk price, and negotiate, call back, call again. So we finally settled on what the cost would be for me to come over here. You remember that? No, just kidding. Glad to be here. Like she said, most of my stories, as far as I know, they're true. They came from Neil himself or his father, Dad, or his mother, Viola. And I don't know whether you knew Neil's dad, but he did have a sense of humor. He was something else. And we had a good time every time he came out the airport. He would be there about 1 hour before Neil would land. And so we talked about times, and well, when I first got to know the Armstrongs, I was just a little boy, probably about 10 or 12. We used to get my hand-me-down clothes because my parents played dominoes with Steve and Viola. And that was usually every other month or so, play dominoes. And then during that time, we'd get a box or a grocery bag of hand-me-down clothes. And I was always the lucky one because I have an older brother, about 4 years older than I am. And one particular item was a Purdue Boilermaker sweatshirt. And I thought, I'm going to have a sweatshirt. Wrong, my brother got it. And this happens so often. In fact, if he was here today, it would probably happen again. But we did have a lot of fun with it. Excuse me. I'm supposed to talk, I think, about 20 minutes. Well, 19 minutes, I'm going to be nervous. And the last minute, then I'll leave that up to asking questions, so we should be all right. One thing I did notice about Neil, after I got to know him a little bit better as we went, he very seldom said, I this, I that. I went to the moon. He did not use the word I very much at all. It was always we. It was a joint effort. And if you remember, he had a advertisement on TV with Chrysler Motors. And that's one reason he stopped it, because they wanted to use the word I or he landed on the moon. Everything was we. So I think that's quite a bit about the plan. Like I said, I get kind of nervous up here. At the last time over at Knoxville Historical Society, my niece said, I told her, we were talking anyhow, I said, if you put the same face on every person out there, then they all look the same, and it's easier to talk. And I try that, like now, it doesn't work. So she says, okay, put them all in underwear and make it all the same. And I look at that and I says, what kind? She says, jockey or boxer. And I says, and I look at all the people here, including myself, I says, only one underwear would work, and that would be depends. So, anyhow, if you've been to the museum and see that airplane hanging upside down, which is an Aranca 7AC, same kind of airplane that I learned to fly only about 10 years after Neil. I don't know whether it's the same airplane. I didn't check my logbook back then, but it's the same kind of airplane, and that airplane is made yet today in Wisconsin. It's called a Citabra. Easy name to remember. It's aerobatic spelled backwards, but that same airplane is made. And one time Neil stopped out at the airport and asked him how it was going, and he says, pretty good, I'm taking aerobatic lessons. Here's a man that went to the moon, had all these incidents, accidents, and he's taking aerobatic lessons. And I never asked him about the moon when he came. Never brought that up. Excuse me. About 25 years ago, we had an air show at the airport. And that was just the same time I was getting out of the hospital and recovering from a heart attack, bypass. And I felt really, really good. My wife was asking me, how you doing? I'm doing fine. They got me a golf cart to drive around and everything, and this is super. Only I didn't tell her that I was taking pain pills so I could be out there. I wasn't even supposed to be out there. This is the day after I got home from the hospital, but I couldn't miss the air show that I worked on. Anyhow, I kept taking pain pills whether I needed them or not, and that was the reason why. Dottie would appreciate that, being a nurse. That is the reason I felt so good. I didn't have any pain. I was driving around in a golf cart. And then it came time to take Neil and his wife, myself, my wife, and some of the airport authority. We were in the airport office and said it's time to take Neil out to the air show flight line. So I thought, good, I'm going to get to take him. So I went out, left my wife. She'll never forgive me for this. She got put back so I could take Neil, and which wasn't right, but and Lynn Hirschfeld, a friend of ours, took her out to the flight line, but I took Neil in the golf cart out there. So that's another memory. After a while, if you have any questions, I'll sure be glad to answer them. Now, these stories that I'm going to tell you about, like I said, they are true. as far as I know. And the one that I thought was really kind of comical, Viola, Neil's mother, called my mother and said, Walter Cronkite was here today, and CBS is going to put up scaffolding so they can send a direct signal, and he is going to be the broadcast from our house on the landing of the moon. And she says, guess what else? They want to bring us a 21-inch TV. And Viola said, this is not a table model, this is a console. And she said, we don't know what to do. 21-inch TV. Now, look what they had. Anyhow, Neil's dad, Steve, said, we can't do that. We deal with Keller's TV in Walpock, and we will not take it from anybody else. Well, the people from CBS says, not a problem. We'll send a man to Keller's, and that's where we'll buy it. And local man does good, you know. As I said, Steve always got to the airport about an hour before Neil landed. This is another kind of humorous story. And Steve walked in and, how you doing? Talked about farming, talking about everything. And I says, Neil coming in? He said, yeah, he should be here half hour, 45 minutes. In the meantime, a man from, I think it was Toledo or Detroit newspaper, he walks in and he says, who's the manager? I says, I am, can I help you? And he says, I need these things that I have in my car signed by Neil. I said, well, Neil's not here. Because I always had an agreement. I would not let the news media know when Neil was coming. I didn't even let the sheriff's department know, did I, Jim? Anyhow, he says, I need these signed. Can you get a hold of him? Now, Steve is sitting there looking at me. What am I going to answer? And I says, I can take your name and number. I'll put the things in the room, lock them up, and give it to him and let you know when he comes in. When's he coming in? I says, we never know. He can come in anytime. He's on his way, but he wasn't there yet. So that went on. He was kind of getting upset with me in the way I handled it. And he made one thing that really made me aggravated. He says, you know, you probably don't even know Neil. And I, easygoing German attitude, you know. I said, well, it seems awful funny. We get Christmas cards personally from him every year. Well, you're not going to help me. You're not going to get this signed. I said, you're going to leave him here. But I do know Neil. His dad, Steve's sitting there taking all this in. And he says, okay, maybe I'll come back and we can talk later. I said, that's fine. He was not even a mile down the road. Neil flies in. Steve says, well, you handled that well. I said, well, he had a chance to meet dad and son. And I says, he turned that away by being with his attitude. He says, you did good. I'm proud. So he told Neil about this. And Neil said, I appreciate it because the news media gets kind of squared away. So that was kind of the end of that story, and never did find out if he got his thing signed. And another particular time when my son was, I think about 12, 13 years old, he was out at the airport. Steve walks in, I says, Neil on his way? I says, Steve said, yep. And then Steve said something like, is this your son? I said, yeah. He said, you want to meet Neil? And I thought, Dad's going to take our son out to meet Neil. So Neil lands. Steve says, can I take him out to meet Neil? They went out to the airplane, talked. I stayed in the office. Pretty soon Steve comes back in. He says they must be hitting it off pretty good. They were out there sitting in Neil's airplane for a half hour talking about flying. And in the meantime, our son got his autograph and they came back. They was both smiling, and Neil walks in the office and says, "Nice meeting your son." And I says, "Well, thank you much. No problem." And they went off, and that was kind of interesting because a couple of years later, Neil came back and asked, he says, "How'd your son ever do?" And I said, "Well, I taught him how to fly." "Oh, you did?" "Yeah, I taught him how to fly." And Neil said, "That was neat. What did you fly?" And I told him I flew the same kind of airplane that he did, 7AC, and I says, "I soloed on skis." "Snow skis?" "Yeah, snow skis." And he said, "Well, that's something I never did." Well, I says, "I never went to the moon either." And Neil thought that was pretty good, so that was a very interesting conversation, and I think from there on we hit it off pretty good. Here's a do you know question for you. Neil's birthplace is out there in Washington Township, and Greenfield Village, supposedly, this is as true as I can tell, they wanted the house to relocate down to Greenfield Village, Detroit, the Henry Ford Museum. And so far, I guess it's still in limbo. Nothing was decided. But the whole property out there is a museum in itself, because if you ever drive past there, every building was made from trees that were on that farmland. The house, the barn, the chicken house, the hog house, every building there was made with wood from the land. So the whole place is a museum in itself. I asked Steve one time, I said, "Did Neil ever ask you or tell you if they had a plan when they left the moon, if things wouldn't have worked out, what they were going to do?" And Steve says, "I'm going to ask him and I'll let you know." Well, it turned out he never let me know. But Steve says, "I'm sure it was something like, 'Good night, America. God bless you, and we'll see you.'" Because I always wondered, did he have another speech? Which I'm sure they did. But, how am I doing on time?
You've got a few more minutes, so now you can relax.
A few more minutes and now I can relax. Oh, okay. Got a question for you in this. I do not have the answer, and I do not know what the correct answer was. Do you know why Neil was chosen to be the command pilot? Anybody take a guess?
He could keep his nerves. I mean, like he stayed under control. He didn't freak out when he did his testing.
Better than I do, right?
Through his training.
Here's my answer,
Yeah.
or my theory. One, he was out of the Navy, he was a civilian. I think that's the number one reason, because now we will not have the military, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, Marines saying, "We did this, we had the first man on the moon." I think it was possibly because he was a civilian. I might be wrong. I haven't been wrong yet today, so I might be wrong. And I also understand there's still an X-15 that Neil flew out in the desert. I told the museum coordinator over in Walpole, I said, "We ought to get that over here." Bill Petty from, used to be with JB Tool, him and I worked on it for one time, trying to get it. He had a truck lined up, but we couldn't get the rest of it. So I hope they can get that back. There's only 3 of them made, and I think one of them was destroyed, and where's the other? Dayton, I believe. I can cut it right there if you want, and if there's any questions, I'd sure be glad to try to answer them. Dennis got to have a question. Oh, yes. On the departure trip from the moon, I have that down here, thanks. There's a switch in there where they start the engine procedures, and you lift up a little guard on there. Guards maybe like that. You lift that up and then you hit the switch. A lot of people don't know that this really happened, but it did. Excuse me. Neil lifted the switch, and when he lifted it, the pin that makes the toggle switch, it fell out and fell on the floor. You're in the space capsule, you cannot bend over and reach that up. What Neil did, without any questions, he took apart his ballpoint pen and took the cartridge and stuck that in the hole so he could press the start button. Now this, I swear, is 100% true. Only no publicity was out about it. So, with his quick thinking, that's what happened. Another thing, when Neil was flying, I think maybe during a Korean conflict, I asked his dad about this also. He was flying over Egypt in that area, and he saw something that really intrigued him. Sitting on top of a mountaintop was the outline of a huge, very huge boat, ship, what we would call the Ark. And he wondered if he discovered Noah's Ark. This is a story that doesn't get out very often, but Steve said he'd let me know, and that again didn't happen. But Neil did go to Egypt, and he tried to get to that mountaintop, and the authorities would only let him go so far. They wouldn't let him go up. So did he see it? We don't know. I know Neil is a very religious gentleman, and so.
So did Neil was born in Washington Township, and then what?
I think they went to Columbus. Steve had a job with the State Department. They moved here to St. Mary's at one time. They had a house here in St. Mary's, and they also had the house in Wapak. So I guess my question would be, if he was born in Washington Township, which New Knoxville's in Washington Township, we don't have a theater. We can't put a sign out there, home of Neil Armstrong. But could we put a sign out, birthplace? Just a question. But I think my most memorable thing of Neil is him saying, we. Everything was we. We did this, we did that. But
Did he ever talk about, like, up in space and all when they walked on the moon, or any other time, did he ever say anything about any kind of religious experience or anything like that you know of?
not that I know of. No, not that I know of. Anybody?
There was a comment about you had, personally had an aircraft incident that was mentioned here at your introduction.
Well, I had a number of them.
I heard about a landing on the road.
Oh, that wasn't an incident. We had a parade in New Knoxville, so I landed. We had a J3 Cub, which is a very small airplane. That was not an accident. I landed behind the school and we pulled the airplane through the parade. Stan might remember this. We pulled it through the parade, and when we got to the traffic light, they wanted us to go right towards the airport. And we went straight towards where Landmark is. And our son was walking with us, and I said, why don't you just block the road over there, and I'll just start it up and take it off. And that's what we did. And one of the airport authority members says, who took that airplane off? I don't know, but I'll talk to him. But it wasn't unsafe. I mean, we had traffic blocked and everything went fine. Pardon? No. We checked it out first.
Well, that's the joys of small town living.
Thank you.
Gary, thank you so much.